Loop diuretics are the mainstay treatment of volume overload. In today's video, we'll discuss how to use these loop diuretics correctly and effectively and avoid possible mistakes that leads to ineffective diuresis. Let's start. Volume overload means excess total body sodium. So diuresis is basically renal sodium and water excretions, which means getting rid of excess sodium from the body. Here are the sites where sodium gets reabsorbed. The filtered sodium gets reabsorbed at the proximal tubule, then the thick ascending loop of Henle, distal convoluted tubules, and the collecting duct. So anything that blocks the reabsorption of sodium will lead to sodium excretion and diuresis. And here, as you know, acetazolamide works here, and loop diuretics work here at the thick ascending loop of Henle at this pump, NAK2Cl pump. Thiazide diuretics works here, and potassium-sparing diuretics works here. Loop diuretics, the common one we use in clinical practice, the most common one and well-known one is furosemide. Then we have torsemide-bumetanide, and the least used one is ethacrynic acid. All are sulfa except ethacrynic acid, so we use it only if there is allergy to the rest of loop diuretics. These loop diuretics have no cross-reactivity with sulfa antibiotics. So if the system give you a pop-up screen saying there's a cross-reactivity because the patient is allergic to sulfa antibiotics, just ignore it. Before we continue, if you want to receive a written summary of this video, please subscribe to my Substack. The link is provided below. Again, we said loop diuretics work right here at this pump, blocking the sodium potassium 2-chloride pump, allowing sodium to be excreted. And remember that loop diuretics produce mainly a diluted urine, it impairs urine concentration. It also leads to calcium excretions. Remember, they can be used in the treatment of hypercalcemia. The loop diuretics are not filtered here. They don't get filtered in the glomerulus. They secreted right here in the proximal tubule. So if there is any problem with the kidney function, like an acute renal failure or chronic kidney failure, the secretion of loop diuretics here will be impaired, and that explains why we need higher doses in these conditions. So that explains the higher doses required in these conditions. 20 to 25% of the filtered sodium here gets excreted out of the body when we use loop diuretics compared to thiazides. We have only 3 to 5%. Here, quick comparison between furosemide, bumetanide, and torsemide. The bioavailability of furosemide is very variable, from 10 to 90%, so we always consider just 50%. And that's why the transition from IV to oral is 1 to 2. Here, it's almost 100%, 80 to 90 and 80 to 90. So the transition between oral and IV is 1 to 1. Half-life, as you see, bumetanide and furosemide 1 to 1.5 hours. The longest one is torsemide, 3.5 to 4 hours, which allow it to be used once daily. The duration of action almost the same for all of them. The onset of action also the same for all of them. For IV 5 minutes and oral 30 to 60 minutes, and peak effect in 1 to 2 hours. And remember that torsemide and bumetanide have also significant hepatic metabolism. Loop direct dose conversion, the ratio between furosemide to torsemide 2 to 1. That means a 10 milligram of furosemide is equivalent to 5 of torsemide. Furosemide to bumetanide is 20 to 1. 20 milligram of furosemide is equivalent to 1 milligram of bumetanide, and torsemide, 10 milligram of torsemide is equivalent to 1 milligram of bumetanide. And they are equally effective if given in equipotent doses. Let's test that. Which is more potent, 20 milligram of torsemide or 2 milligram of bumetanide? Remember, 2 milligram of bumetanide or Bumix is equivalent to 20 milligram of torsemide, so they are equally potent. 40 milligram of furosemide or 40 milligram of torsemide, of course 40 milligram of torsemide, because it's double the furosemide, so the 40 milligram of torsemide is equally effective to 80 milligram of furosemide. Let's convert to equipotent dose of furosemide. 10 milligram of torsemide will be equivalent to 20 milligram of furosemide, and 0.5 milligram of bumetanide will be equally effective to 10 milligram of furosemide. Transition from IV to oral. So furosemide 40 milligram, if we're going to transition that to oral, we have to double that. If it's this IV 40, you have to give 80 milligram PO. Remember, we said the bioavailability is 50%, so a 50% of 80 is 40. And it's 1 to 1 of bumetanide and torsemide because their bioavailability almost 100%. So 1 milligram and 20 milligram here. Now, bolus therapy, when you give these loop diuretics with bolus therapy, there is very important characteristics here. As you see, when you give the bolus dose, we quickly reach the peak of action and remain there as long as we are in the duration of action. And there is a quick and sudden drop after that to almost zero. And then if you add a second dose, you see you reach a peak here, but it's slightly less than the first dose peak. And then again, quickly a drop. And that's something we physiologically known by rebound or post-diuretic sodium retention. So if the patient is on high sodium diet, imagine once the sodium excretion dropped to zero and you are on high sodium diet, so whatever you lost, you're gonna gain it again. So it's very important. That's why we always say low sodium diet. And that tells you the importance of having a second dose and sometimes a third dose, because if you give just furosemide for once a day, you're gonna have 6 to 8 hours of diuresis, and the rest of the day you're gonna have no diuresis. This is very important to understand. So the fix to that is adding a second or third dose and the low sodium diet. Also, the other way we can fix is continuous infusion, because as you see the bolus, as we just explained, you reach the peak, stay there during the duration of action, then drop quickly. While the continuous infusion, especially if you give a bolus dose, a loading dose, and then see the effective dose stay for a longer period of time because we're using continuous infusion. That's why it's considered more or equally effective to bolus therapy, especially if a loading dose is given, and we highly recommend that. If you're going to use furosemide, we use 40 to 200 milligram bolus, depends on the condition we're treating, then to 10 to 20 milligram per hour. Bumix or bumetanide, 1 to 2 to 4 milligram bolus, and then 0.5 or 1 or 2 milligram per hour, and sometimes 4 milligram per hour. Very important here also to understand, see here we gave a diuretic, but you see we have very low diuretic effect until we reach this point, and then suddenly boom, we have increase in the sodium excretion. As the dose goes higher, we have increase in the sodium excretion until we reach a point where any increase in the dose does not increase the sodium excretion or diuresis much. This is what we call here maximum effective dose. That if you go higher than this, you're only gonna get a little increase in the diuretic effects. And here, this is what we call the threshold, that if you give the dose less than the threshold, you're not going to get any diuretic effect or very little. But once you touch the threshold, you're going to have increase in sodium excretion as long as you're increasing the dose until you reach the maximum effective dose. Very important to understand that. And that brings me to this table I borrowed from UpToDate. And as you can see here, we have the starting dose, maximum effective dose, and maximum recommended daily dose. And if you look here, every condition has its own starting dose and maximum effective dose. And the highest doses you will see are in nephrotic syndrome and in kidney disease. So it's very important, if you give a dose, let's say a cirrhotic patient, you give them 10 or 20 milligram, you're not going to get any diuresis or very minimal diuresis because you did not touch the threshold. These are the threshold. So remember this table very well. You don't have to memorize it, just look it up. If for healthy individual, the maximum effective dose, if you're going to give Lasix for a reason or another to a healthy patient, is 40 milligram. This is the maximum effective dose. Let's test this. Who will have more diuresis? A patient who is healthy individual A and healthy individual B. The first one you give 40, the second one you give 80. So the maximum effective dose 40. So giving 80 is not going to give you much additional diuresis. So they are the same. Number two, cirrhotic patients. The first one giving 40 milligram Q daily and the second 40 milligram BID. Of course, the 40 milligram BID will get more diuresis as we explained. Let's have this another question. A patient with cirrhosis and portal hypertension presented with ascites, started on furosemide 20 milligram BID. Next day, he had minimal response. How would you explain this? This dose is below the threshold dose, and that's why you have minimal diuresis. You need to start at the threshold dose, which is 40 milligram once or twice daily, to start seeing an effective diuresis. A patient was started on furosemide for lower extremity edema who returned 2 weeks later complaining that despite initial improvement, edema has not improved. How would you explain that? And before we explain that, let me bring this page here. So the green arrow here is the sodium N, the sodium intake, and the pink one is the sodium excretion through the kidney. As you see, they are equal here. Diuretics given here. We have a fixed dose of diuretics, and after we give the diuretics, you see the pink is much larger, much more excretion of sodium compared to the intake, and the intake is fixed here. And then slowly the sodium excretion through the kidney is declining until we reach again they are equal despite the patient is taking the same diuretic dose. So what happened? This is another physiologic things that the body will develop. It's called steady state. And basically, if you look at here, if I give loop diuretics here at the sodium potassium 2 chloride pump, the body start having compensatory mechanism by having more reabsorption of sodium at this side and at this side to compensate for the lost sodium. So after a couple of weeks, sometimes sooner, sometimes later than that, you reach the steady states. And that's why the patient was not having much improvement, because he reached the steady state. And the steady state applies to other electrolytes. If you reach here and the patient electrolytes are okay, they are unlikely to develop any hypokalemia, hypomagnesemia, or metabolic alkalosis. Any electrolyte abnormality will develop right here in this period here. So how do you overcome that? Is by increasing the diuretic dose or increasing the frequency of the same diuretics, or augment that diuresis. Let's say you give loop diuretics here. What you do, you can give thiazides here or give potassium sparing diuretics here, because remember, compensatory mechanism work on this side. This is very important phenomena that you need to understand. Now, we need to avoid ototoxicity with loop diuretics. And the way we do that is by avoiding to exceed the maximum recommended daily doses as we see here, especially if you're giving an ototoxic medication like aminoglycosides. And remember, ethacrynic acid, which we should use only if there is allergy to the rest of loop diuretics, is more ototoxic. Now, in all patients with volume overload, when we diurese them, we must put them on low sodium diet, strict low sodium diet, less than 2 grams a day. We must obtain daily weight, and we must have a strict INOs, and Foley's catheter are not always necessary to do that. How about the use of fluid restriction in volume overload? I only use fluid restriction if there is associated hyponatremia, or what we call hypotonic hypervolemic hyponatremia. And when I do fluid restriction, I usually restrict to less than 800 to 1000 ml of all kinds of fluid. Remember, if you drink water day and night, water does not give you volume, but it will induce hyponatremia. The issue with volume overload, as we explained, is salt intake. So only if there is hyponatremia, I use fluid restriction. So not every single one with volume overload needs fluid restriction. Now, monitoring while on loop diuretics, we monitor potassium, sodium, BUN and creatinine, the kidney function, calcium, magnesium, and bicarb. So in patients receiving daily IV diuretics, we obtain daily or every other day BMP. Daily weight is the most sensitive measurements of adequate diuresis, so we need to obtain that. And I tell them to use the same weight scales in the morning before the patient eats anything. And the strict INOs, we target daily negative fluid balance. When you look at the fluid balance, it should be negative every day and significantly negative. And remember to watch for signs of over-diuresis. Watch for kidney function. If there is a constant increase in BUN creatinine, along with the resolution of edema, and there is a significant negative fluid balance, that's a sign that you need to stop diuretics. Hypotension or borderline blood pressure or orthostatic hypotension, tachycardia. In these cases, DC diuretics and consider IV fluid. Yes, you may need to give some fluids back. Now, how about a patient that you notice their BUN creatinine is going up despite they have persistent or worsening edema? This kind of a challenging case here. What we do, I add albumin before giving the diuretics and 15 to 20 minutes before administering the diuretics. So if I'm giving LACE, I will tell them give, let's say, for example, 12.5 to 25 gram of albumin before giving furosemide, for example. And most of the time that helps getting the diuresis you need and keep the BUN creatinine stable or less than that. And remember, you may need to look for other reasons. Maybe there is some interstitial nephritis from diuretics, or some other medication, or some antibiotics. So it's not always related to that. If I did all of that, still there is inadequate diuresis, again, make sure the patient is compliant with the low sodium diet and make sure the diuretic dose is above the threshold level as we explained. What I do, increase the dose or frequency or both, or sometimes going above the maximum effective dose. Although we explain that usually will not give you much additional diuresis, but will leave the effective dose at a longer time. Now, diuretic in liver cirrhosis is a special case. We always need a combination diuretics, loop diuretics and spironolactone from the potassium-sparing diuretics. Monotherapy is way less effective. And if you decide to use monotherapy, remember spironolactone monotherapy surprisingly is more effective than loop diuretic monotherapy. And we use furosemide typically from the loop diuretics because bumetanide and torsemide metabolize by the liver. The ratio is 40 to 100 milligram, and if we want to titrate up, we increase by 40 to 100 milligram to a maximum of 160 milligram of furosemide and 400 milligram of aldactone or spironolactone. Now, if you develop metabolic alkalosis and fluid overload, we can use loop diuretics plus potassium-sparing diuretics. But if I need excessive diuresis, then acetazolamide is preferred because it's much stronger diuretics compared to potassium-sparing diuretics. But if you use this, please make sure to replete potassium aggressively because profound hypokalemia can develop. Now, cases of resistance or refractory edema, again, patient complies with low sodium diet and consider adding metolazone 2.5 to 5 milligram. Metolazone is a thiazide related, but it can augment diuresis, and we get excellent diuresis when we use it with loop diuretics. It kind of doesn't work alone, so you should never use it alone, always along or add it to loop diuretics. And again, you need to monitor for potassium because that can induce profound hypokalemia and replete it aggressively. If you like this video, please give it a like and share it with your colleague. And if you want to receive a summary of this video, please subscribe to my Substack page. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next video.